What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I actually left some of my editing at work, which was going to be on the intake, so I'll save that for next week. Anyway, it's about time for another video on car buying. Now, I did an earlier video on should you lease your next ride, and it was more of a defensive mechanism for my previous video, but on how I pay $500 a month for a Hellcat. So I think today I want to go in a little bit deeper into leasing and kind of bust some myths, or maybe just explain what a lot of people don't know about leasing. So here we go. I'm going to try to break this up into a few parts to where it doesn't take too long, or maybe a couple videos. I'm not too sure. But first of all, just kind of like, before I got into the car business, I always thought leasing was one of the worst things you could do. Oh, you're just renting a car. You're never getting anything out of it. Why would you do that? You're just basically, it's a glorified rental. And, when you think about it, for the people that want to trade in, or they end up getting a new car every couple of years, I mean, really, what else did you do? You pretty much, the bank owned your car, you made a few payments on it, and then you traded it back in. So really, is there that much difference? And a lot of the time you are paying 3, 4, 5% up to 6% interest, maybe, because you got to have pretty good credit to lease, versus if you can find the right lease deal, I mean, it's under 1% interest. So I think leasing really goes out to the people that want to change cars every few years, and that don't really plan on doing major modifications, unless they want to keep it, which I'll go into that, which you can do at the end of the lease if you'd like. So a few things out of the way about leasing that a lot of people don't understand. Right off the bat, I think what I should say is, a lot of people think, oh, well, you're stuck in a lease. The minute you sign up, if anything happens, when you get into leasing, you think you're stuck, and the minute you sign the papers, you can't get out of it unless you pay off the remaining amount of the lease. Well, that's not true. Just like you buy a car, there's always a payoff. So let's say your loan, you bought a car for $40,000, you put $5,000 down, tax tag title, your loan is for $38,000. The more you pay on it, the more that balance goes down. So when you go to trade it in, your car is worth X amount, and then you have your payoff, which is whatever you owe the bank. Well, there is that payoff as well on a lease. A lot of people don't know that. They just think that the only way out of it, if anything happens, is I got to pay the rest of my payments, which is a large chunk of money. I mean, if you just started your lease and you're a year in, and you're in a $20,000 lease over the course of 3 years, you'd be close to paying, almost $7 grand, or minus that. So, what is that? 13 grand probably. Well, that's not true. You don't have to do that. That's just one of the ways out of it. You can always call the bank. Let's just say in the Chrysler world, it's Chrysler Capital, Ford Motor Credit, or whatever it is. You call the person that has your lease, and there is a payoff as well, which is what a dealer is willing to basically buy the car out at, or what the dealer would have to buy the car out at to obtain the vehicle. Now, there are rare cases that a bank won't let another dealer buy the car. I've seen some rare cases where that'll happen, but there's usually, if you keep it poking at it, you'll find somebody that'll be able to buy the car. So what does that mean? Well, your car is always worth a certain amount of money too, depending on how many miles you put on it. So obviously leasing probably isn't for the people that rack up a ton of miles. But either way, even if you buy a car and you rack up tons of miles, you're going to be usually in negative equity. So it's the same thing. So again, what does all that mean? Let's say you're in a lease for a year and a half, and you've got $10,000 worth of payments left. Well, what you need to do is go to Kelley Blue Book, whatever, the same thing that you would do, see about what your car is worth on trade-in, and then you can see what your payoff is, and that's actually where you stand in the lease as well, if you can find somebody to buy your car. So if your car is worth 20 grand and your payoff from the bank that you're leasing it through is 18, Well, you're only $2,000 upside down versus paying the rest of your payments, which was whatever it is, 10 grand or whatever. So that's a lot better situation and a lot more similar to a buy scenario for a car. So a lot of people don't know that. So keep that in mind. A lot of people think that you're just stuck, and it's really not true. And it doesn't have to be the same dealer. So if you bought or leased a Chevy and now you want a Dodge, well, that's fine. You can go to a Dodge dealer with your Chevy and do exactly what I just said. They can look up your payoff, they can value your trade, and then give you the difference. Now, this is where you really want to do your research, though, like in a previous video that I told you. I'll put a link up above, where you need to know your stuff. Know what your car is worth. And try to call the bank yourself and get the payoff. That way, whatever they're saying is right. Because if your car is worth 18 and they're like, yeah, well, it's worth 16 and you owe 20, well, they're trying to make a couple extra grand in there on your trade. So you got to just know your stuff, but there is that extra way out. And to kind of go on top of that, you can actually be in an equity position in a lease, and that's kind of how I calculated mine. I don't do a whole lot of miles, so I kind of looked up what a 3-year-old Hellcat Charger was going to be going for, with about 20,000 miles on it, because I do about 7,000 to 8,000 miles a year, and it was about 48,000, and that was auction price. So your buying price, like what you can buy the vehicle for, is established at the very beginning of the lease, and it's basically the price of the car minus the residual value that you paid over the term of the lease. So I could buy this car for, I think it's around 43 or 44,000. So if I can buy this car in 3 years for less than what it's worth, well, that's pretty awesome. And I know what you're saying, you've already paid that money, so what's the difference? There isn't really a whole lot of difference, and that's kind of what I'm getting down to here, is that everyone thinks leasing is such a different, so different than buying, which calculating it and formulating it and the ins and outs, yes, but all in all, when it gets down to it, it's relatively the same stuff. It's just trying to predict what the value is going to be in 3 years, and sometimes you come out on top. Now, when I get to the end of the lease, that's when I'm going to have an option to buy it for 44. So immediately, if I did not want to keep this car, or I wanted to just trade it in for the newer model, I would be about $4,000 to $5,000 positive equity, because as long as I can find a dealer that's really willing to give me what I want, or what it's worth, whether it be 48, 49, depending on the market, of course, but I can buy it for 44, well, that's what you have to do. At the end of the lease, you would buy the car for $44,000 or whatever. You would establish a loan on it at that point, just like a normal car, and now you own it. Well, now that you own it, you can trade it in wherever you want to. They don't know that you had a lease before. It doesn't matter. You own the car. So now you only paid $44,000, so you got that loan or whatever for that amount, and now you can trade it into whoever you want to. You can find a dealer that's willing to give you $50,000 just because they're trying to move the car that you're trying to buy. Dealers do it all the time. They over-allow for the trade-in. So heck, if I got $50,000 for the car, I kept it super clean, which I'm going to do, and they had somebody looking for that one or something, or they just want a hot car for the showroom, they might even give me more for it. So I could be $6,000 in equity, and I can put that money towards another lease if I wanted to, or cut it in half like I did at this one. I said, give me, half my equity back in a check and put the other $3,000 towards the new lease. So you can work these deals over and over again. Now, of course, my situation is just slightly different because I don't put a whole lot of miles on my car. But the idea is, if I did my 10,000 mile a year lease and used all 30,000 miles, that my car would be worth about 44 when it's all said and done. So that's what they try to calculate. Now, I don't really see myself giving the keys back per se, unless I do somehow use the miles. That's really about the only situation. And of course, I would be checking the market of what they would be trading in for, because if they're going to be trading in for any more than $44,000, then it's stupid to give the keys back, because when you give the keys back, you're going to get inspected. They're going to come out and make sure that the car is all this and that. Well, when you buy something, it doesn't matter about any of that. It doesn't matter about over miles. It doesn't matter about any dings or dents or scratches or whatever the inspector wants to inspect. They don't do all that when you buy the car. They only do it when you're going to trade it back in or drop the keys off. So if I buy the car, it doesn't matter if I went over miles. It doesn't matter if I went under miles. Because if I went over miles, well, it's my car, and now that car has that mileage on it. So when I go to trade it in somewhere else, I've already kind of taken that hit, because the dealer's not going to give me as much for it. But if I'm under miles, well, then it's worth more than what I paid for it. So that's why buying it at the end of the lease is really a smart thing to do, because now it all depends on the market at the time. So if your car, I mean, let's just say that gas prices went to $10 a gallon and nobody in their right mind wants a Hellcat, and it's worth $38,000. Well, now I can just give the keys back, and I'm not, I don't have, or if I wanted to keep the car, then I would just buy it. But you see where I'm going there. It's all about the market at the time of the end of the lease, and that's what they're trying to predict. Okay, I'm going to go into basically how a lease is structured generally. You have a MSRP of the vehicle, and then you have the sale price of the vehicle, what the dealer is willing to sell you the vehicle for, and then you have a residual value, which is what they are saying the car is going to be worth whenever your lease is over. And then you have the money factor, which is basically like a interest rate. It's just calculated a little bit differently. So to go back just a step on the residual value, what that is, again, is what the car is going to be worth at the end of the term of the lease. Now, the thing is about a lease, the banks are usually the, brand bank of what you're buying. So you get a Chrysler, it's Chrysler Capital. You get a Ford, it's Ford Motor Credit. Kia Motor Credit. So they control all of the numbers in this situation. They control the rebates, they control the money factor, and they control the residual value. So this is why you can get such a good deal on a lease, because if you're buying something, really all they do is control the rebates. You don't have to go through Chrysler Capital. So you can pick a different bank. Well, they didn't make the money on the financing. But when they're leasing and doing all the financing and selling the car, that means they can play with what they think the car is worth and what the interest rate is to get you a better deal on the lease to push their cars. So that's why you can get such a good deal. So how does that all work? Well, if the residual value is higher, then that's going to make your what's left at the end of the lease more, but it makes your lease payment less, because basically what you're doing in a lease is paying the depreciation over the term of your lease, which a lot of people know that part. So if the money factor, the residual value is higher, that means what's left is going to be higher, but that means what you initially paid for the depreciation is lower. So when the residual value is high, that makes for a good lease. What's a good residual value? Usually the idea is anything over 50% is good. What comes into play after that? The money factor and the price of the vehicle. So, for example, on this car, it was I did a 10,000 mile lease. It was 65%, which that's astronomical for a car like this, and that's why it leases so well. You just had to catch the right time. At the time, the money factor was 0.00013, and you're like, oh, what the heck is that? An easy way to figure out, kind of in layman's terms, what that means is you can take any money factor and multiply it by 2400. So 0.00013 times 2400, I think, was 0.026%. That's the interest rate. So you've got to think, you're only paying like $50 or something in interest throughout the entire 3 years. So people that bought the car and they're paying 3, 4, 5% interest, well, they just paid a whole heck of a lot more money than you did. to rent that car or use the car for 3 years, and then they just go ahead and trade it back in. So even if you did decide to buy it at the end, yes, you would be in a longer term, I guess you could say, than the other person, but you were also paying a heck of a lot less to kind of make up your mind, if that makes sense. So where they were paying $900 a month, you were only paying, $500 or $600. And then at the end of 3 years, you're in a better position because, well, if you didn't like the car, you want to trade it in, you can either get out of it free and clear and not have to worry about negative equity or anything, and you put maybe $3,000 down instead of $10,000 down or something. So there's a lot of different ways to structure a lease, and that's why when you're going to look, you've got to make sure those few numbers add up. Wait for a good money factor, wait for a good residual. You're saying, well, how do I know what's good? Well, pretty much what I just said is if the residual is above 50%, that's pretty good. When you can find them in the 60s, which there's not a whole lot of vehicles that do that, then that's a great time to get them. The money factor, whenever there's at least 3 zeros, you're getting a pretty good deal. 0.00011, 0.00045. Those are all pretty good numbers. I usually just, go by how many zeros there are after the point. 0.001, it's okay. It's just a fair deal. It's not really nothing great. So I'd wait for 3 zeros and the residual to be over 50%, and you'll usually be able to get a pretty good number. There's lease calculators out there online. It's relatively confusing to hand calculate a lease. There's plenty of good calculators. I think Edmunds has a really good one that's pretty easy. I'll put a link in the description for it. I have a program at work that I can basically just punch it all into and it calculates it for me. Now, you'll get close. There's no way to get perfect, okay? Because every dealer's different. They're going to have their own fees. The taxes are going to be different. The state taxes are going to be different. Your county taxes are going to be different. So the idea is to just get close. That way you're not getting, if the dealer's $100 off, well, there's an issue. But if they're, $5, $10 within what you came up with, then at least you're getting the deal that you should be. You also have to know what they're selling you the vehicle for when you go to do those calculations. So just make sure you have all that information when you go to do your own calculation. Also, something about, real quick about Hellcats, because it's not like others. They have something that's called a gas guzzler tax, which you've probably heard of. In a lease, you actually have to subtract that from the MSRP to calculate the lease rate, because leases are calculated off of the sticker price. So when you're using the sticker price, before you enter in that calculator, take the sticker price, $70,000, and then subtract your gas guzzler tax, $1,700. So, 68.3 or whatever it is, 68.7, 68.3. That's going to be your MSRP. So it kind of takes away from the value of the car by having that gas guzzler tax, because it's just a big tax. So it takes away from the value. I just wanted to add this quick tidbit that I forgot, and that the lease is calculated by the mileage that you're going to be using. I know that everybody kind of knows that, but it's structured usually with 10,000 being the minimum, 12,000 being the middle, and 15,000 being the max. Now, I've heard of some ultra low mile leases of like 7,500 or something like that, but Chrysler Capital doesn't do that. Now, taking that part into consideration, the residual value changes depending on what lease mileage you go with. Now you're like, well, why would they do that? Well, because that's what's judging the value of your car. Well, the value of your car relies heavily upon how many miles you put on it. Now, how Chrysler Capital does it is, if you go with let's just say the residual value is 50%. Well, that's what it is for 15,000 miles a year. So if you go with a 12,000 mile a year lease, that's less mileage, so you're going to get a bump in residual value, and it's to the tune of 2%. So now your residual value is 52%, which is why your lease payment goes down. Then if you go with an ultra low mileage lease like I did, it's 10,000 miles a year. You get 1% more on top of that for a total of 3% over the regular residual value. So instead of 50%, it is now 53%. So that's how I got my lease to 65%. Actually was, when I did it, it was 62% at 15,000. But if you did a 10,000, it was 65%. Now sometimes that can vary the payment from $20 to $30, just with those few residual value bumps. So the residual value is a major thing. When you're like, oh, it's 50% to 52%, no big deal. Well, yeah, I mean, it can be $30-something a month just for those little percentages. So I wanted to interject that in the video and let you know that that's what I missed. I think the last section I'll go into here on this video is putting money down on a lease. A lot of people say don't put any money down on a lease. It's a waste of money, blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell you why. When you put money down on a lease, all it does is lower your payment through the lease. That's it. When you're leasing something, renting it, if something happens during the lease, let's say the car is totaled, okay? You don't get that money back. As long as you have gap, which a lot of people that do leasing have the gap coverage in it because they don't want to get screwed, because they know the buyer doesn't really have anything to do with it. So they want the vehicle to be worth what it's worth if it gets totaled, because they have to pay it off. So a lot of gap coverage is included, and that might be another thing that you want to check with on the bank side of it to make sure you're not getting double screwed, because they might try to sell you gap insurance, but it might already be included. So let's say you're going to Chrysler Capital or Ford. Chrysler Capital, by the way, is built in, so don't let any dealer tell you that you got to buy gap, because it's already included. But if you're going to get a Ford or you're going to get a Chevy or something like that, make sure you call Chevy Finance directly and ask them, if you can't Google it or something, do you have gap coverage included in your leasing? That way you know you're covered. So going back to this point of why you don't put money down, or why you might not want to put money down. So again, if the car is totaled and it's got gap insurance and all that kind of stuff, and you put $3,000 down, well, they're going to cover the rest of the lease and get you out of it free and clear, but your $3,000, they ain't giving you the money back. So that's the only thing you kind of got to take into consideration is you're taking a little bit of a risk when you put money down. I mean, I did it. Like I said, if you watch my other video, I put $3,750 down because I don't have the self-control to reserve that money and supplement my monthly payment, because that's actually what you should do. If you have the means and the willpower and self-control to set aside the money that you were going to put down and then supplement your monthly payment, that's really what you should do. Because that way, if anything happens, you've still got your money in the bank. So take that into consideration. I had the money in equity in my car, so I just said, the heck with it, just do it. I don't drive that much. Yes, I know I'm taking the risk, but that's a risk that I'm willing to take to keep the payment low if I need to use the cash for other things. So that's why people say don't put any money down on a lease. Also, if you don't do any of your research, that's another way for dealers to make more money. When you put money down on a lease, they can kind of play with the money a little bit. There's a way that they can be like, oh, he's giving us $3,000 down, so we'll just make the payment only go down. Let's just say the payment was supposed to go down $30 per month if you put $1,000 down. Well, they're making it $25 a month. So instead of it being, $90 down, it's only $75 less a month, and they pocketed the rest of the money. So that's why, if you are going to put money down, keep in mind you could lose it if something basically was to happen to the car. And the dealer can kind of play with the numbers a little bit more. That's why doing your own research and doing your own calculations is key. So I'm trying to think of anything else that I missed in the video. I'll probably take a quick break just to think for a second and get right back. This V6 Mustang keeps doing ricer flybys, so I think I might give him one. Woo! Man, that doesn't get old. He had his top down, so I had to give it to him, and his little chicky poo in there. Guess he's not getting any tonight. Oh, honey, why doesn't your car make noises like that? Why doesn't it go fast like that? Alright guys, well I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, turn on the notifications with the little bell. That way you can get a notification for my new videos coming out. And if you haven't checked out some of my older videos, there's cool videos on the car. And then there are more car buying advice as well. So stay tuned for next week. I'm going to have the video processed on the intake. And then I'll be probably doing some more on the car buying series. If you have any questions that I didn't get to, or I didn't think about, or you just have a question, just leave it in the comment below. And I'm usually pretty good about answering everybody's questions. So see you next time.